Hello, my name is Ben Branco, and I am back today to discuss the usability of my first ever blended learning unit. I created a blended learning unit for my Algebra 1 students on their polynomials and quadratic modeling standards. I created the Start Here portion of the unit along with the first 4 modules for students to complete. I then had 2 of my colleagues and one of my class of students spend approximately 30 minutes on the blended learning Google Classroom page before giving me feedback via open discussion and a Google form. I think this group of users was the correct choice for my initial usability test because the students could give me feedback about the look and layout of the unit. They can give me feedback on the clarity of directions and their initial feelings when looking at the amount of work. While the students gave me feedback on those parameters, my colleagues could give me feedback based on a totally different perspective. Educators could have given me feedback on the standards, depth of knowledge, and their overall impression of the outlook for this blended learning unit. As I mentioned before, I used Google Classroom as the platform. This software was the best choice for me as it is the platform that Lakewood City Schools, my district, has chosen for their technology platform. Thus, students and faculty have many years of experience within the ecosystem. I think this impacted my usability to be skewed a bit higher than it would be had I given the usability test to people that were new to Google Classroom. In fact, because of this familiarity, students in that 30-minute window that I gave them started to actually take hold and start the unit. So they were able to give me some very specific feedback for the whole class discussion. So let's see what the feedback is from my colleagues and from my students. So now you should be seeing a screen recording of my Google survey results. First up, we have the teacher evaluation. Both teachers thought the content was presented in a clear way and was age and difficulty appropriate, and both agreed that the content met the standards. When I started to see some usable feedback was how easily, or should I say not so easily, it was to navigate between modules and specifically understand the directions. Both teachers thought the course was effective, and I enjoyed reading that one teacher thought that the strength was the hands-on part of the unit. They gave me some great help for future by possibly adding a checklist or calendar to make things more easy for students to understand. Now we have the students' response. As you can see, more than half agreed that the content was presented in a clear way. But as we look at the directions being clear, you can see that there are more students who felt neutral about this, the 18.2 versus the 9.1. Continuing on, most students agreed that the site was easy to navigate. Looking at the effectiveness of the course, you see I have one student who gave it a 1. And as I asked this student about that, they responded by saying they had had enough online learning during COVID and that they want to be in the traditional classroom setting, being able to work with more of their students. That made me realize that this blended learning program might have gone too far on the individual silent work side, and that I need to make sure I incorporate collaborative learning along with it. Otherwise, most students agreed that the unit seemed to be effective. Lastly, the strengths and improvements are listed. Mostly the videos are being a positive, but some thought they could be too boring. Others really enjoyed the idea of Cedar Point. Most can agree, though, that the unit seems overwhelming and that it is one task that I am definitely going to have to address in the future. The biggest lesson that I learned from my students was the overwhelming nature that they felt with seeing all the work piled in front of them at once. My students have gotten used to seeing all the assignments they were responsible on the first day for the unit. However, seeing all of the assignments, along with the videos, notes, worksheets, was a bit overwhelming to them. In the future, I would open up each section individually when students are ready to begin that unit. Secondly, this would help with the initial jubilation that students proclaimed when they saw that the unit concluded with a trip to Cedar Point and a project that featured roller coasters. That is not to say that I would withhold this information from the students. Rather, I would verbally tell them and control the initial excitement instead of having students ask a plethora of random questions that do not pertain to the unit at that moment. As far as educator feedback, I didn't learn too much from the Google form. However, I was given much more insight via discussions that I had with my colleagues. The first thing that both colleagues told me was how much they would love this setup in the unit, and the idea that students have so much control over the timing and how student-centered this is. They both said the standards were covered nicely, and the material was rigorous for students in advanced classes. From what they told me, I should be expecting both of their advanced algebra classes to join on the Cedar Point field trip. So Dr. H, I am making your dreams come true of advancing my learning to my colleagues and making more minions to improve education from the archaic system that we're used to. This process of creating a blended learning unit has improved my classroom experience and the student learning immensely. A few days after I introduced this blended learning unit and had students complete the usability test, I was out sick from school, thus my voice right now. Instead of coming up with a pile of busy work for students to complete with a sub, I pivoted the in-person lesson that I had created to a lesson that is student-centered, blended learning, all on Google Classroom. The note that I got from the sub the next day and the positive reaction of my students cemented my decision to alter my classroom. Creating a blended learning unit can be difficult the first time, but the same can be said about traditional teacher-led lessons. With repetition comes success. And that is exactly how blended learning creation goes. This usability testing has not impacted my alignment of outcomes and activities. This may be because I only had the first section of the unit completed for usability. Colleagues said the standards were covered explicitly in the first few modules, but I am eager to see how the real-world application and roller coaster section truly align to the assessment as and of learning.